Okay, ready for Marvellous Medicine number 2. They were in the kitchen now and the big saucepan was on the stove. All the things Mr. Cranky had bought were lined up near the sink. "Come along, my boy," cried Mr. Killy Cranky. "Which one did you put in first?" "This one," George said. "Golden Gloss hair shampoo." He emptied the bottle into the pan. "Now the toothpaste," George went on, "and the shaving soap, and the face cream, and the nail varnish." "Keep at it, my boy," cried Mr. Cranky, dancing round the kitchen. "Keep putting them in. Don't stop, don't pause, don't hesitate. It's a pleasure, my dear fellow, to watch you work." One by one, George poured and squeezed the things into the saucepan. With everything so close at hand, the whole job didn't take him more than 10 minutes. But when it was all done, the saucepan didn't somehow seem to be quite as full as it had been the first time. "Now what did you do?" cried Mr. Cranky. "Did you stir it?" "I boiled it," George said, "but not for long, and I stirred it as well." So Mr. Cranky lit the gas under the saucepan and George stirred the mixture with the same long wooden spoon he'd used before. "It's not brown enough," George said. "Wait a minute, I know what I've forgotten." "What?" cried Mr. Cranky. "Tell me quick, because if we've forgotten even one tiny thing it won't work, at least not in the same way." "A quart of brown gloss paint," George said. "That's what I've forgotten." Mr. Killy Cranky shot out of the house and into his car like a rocket. He sped down to the village and bought the paint and rushed back again. He opened the can in the kitchen and handed it to George. George poured the paint into the saucepan. "Aha! That's better," George said. "That's more like the right colour." "It's boiling," cried Mr. Cranky. "It's boiling and bubbling, George. Is it ready yet?" "It's ready," George said. "At least I hope it is." "Right," shouted Mr. Cranky, hopping about. "Let's test it. Let's give some to a chicken." "Oh, my heavens alive, why don't you calm down a bit?" Mrs. Cranky said, coming into the kitchen. "Calm down?" cried Mr. Cranky. "You expect me to calm down? And here we are mixing up the greatest medicine ever discovered in the history of the world. Come along, George, dip a cupful out of the saucepan and get a spoon and we'll give some to a chicken, just to make absolutely sure we've got the correct mixture." Outside in the yard there were several chickens that hadn't had any of George's Marvellous Medicine number 1. They were pecking about in the dirt in that silly way that chickens do. George crouched down, holding out a spoonful of Marvellous Medicine number 2. "Come on, chicken," he said. "Good chicken, chick, chick, chick." A white chicken with black specks on its feathers looked up at George. It walked over to the spoon and went, peck. The effect that medicine number 2 had on the chicken was not quite the same as the effect produced by medicine number 1, but it was very interesting. "Whoosh!" shrieked the chicken, and it shot 6 feet up in the air and came down again. Then sparks came flying out of its beak, bright yellow sparks of fire, as though someone was sharpening a knife on a grindstone inside its tummy. Then its legs began to grow longer. Its body stayed the same size, but the 2 thin yellow legs got longer and longer and longer and longer still. "What's happening to it?" cried Mr. Killy Cranky. "Something's wrong," George said. The legs went on growing, and the more they grew, the higher up into the air went the chicken's body. When the legs were about 15 feet long, they stopped growing. The chicken looked perfectly absurd with its long, long legs and its ordinary little body perched high up on top. It was like a chicken on stilts. "Oh, my sainted aunts!" cried Mr. Killy Cranky. "We've got it wrong. This chicken's no good to anybody. It's all legs. No one wants chicken's legs." "I must have left something out," George said. "I know you left something out," cried Mr. Cranky. "Think, boy, think. What was it you left out?" There's a picture of the chicken. "I've got it," George said. "What was it? Quick!" "Flea powder for dogs," George said. "You mean you put flea powder in the first one?" "Yes, Dad, I did a whole carton of it." "Then that's the answer." "Wait a minute," said George. "Did we have brown shoe polish on the list?" "We did not," said Mr. Cranky. "I used that too," said George. "Well, no wonder it went wrong," said Mr. Cranky. He was already running to his car, and soon he was heading down to the village to buy more flea powder and more shoe polish. And we'll be back tomorrow for Marvellous Medicine number 3.